Right, everyone, I'll just get started then with the introduction. So, hi, everyone. You're all very welcome to this evening's webinar. So, my name is Nicola and I work for AsIAm, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. So tonight's seminar is part of an AsIAm and SuperValu webinar series that we've been running together throughout 2021. So the topic tonight is autism and school avoidance. So we have two speakers for you tonight. So first we have Peter Wharmby, and then we're going to hear from Lauren Ann Martin. So Pete is our first speaker and he'll be speaking for about 45 minutes or so. So Pete is joining us from the UK this evening. So Pete is an autistic speaker, writer, tutor and parent. Lauren Ann is also here, so she's going to be speaking for about 15 minutes after Pete, and she's going to be giving us an insight into her own personal experience with school avoidance. So just to point out a couple of housekeeping items. So if you look at the bottom of your screen there, you'll see a Q&A box. So please feel free to pop any questions you have into that box throughout the presentation, and we'll try our very best to answer in our question and answer sessions that will be taking place when both speakers are finished at the end. You'll notice as well we have the subtitles turned on for the seminar, but if you do want to turn them off yourself, there is an option next to the chat box. So it's a box that says live transcript, and in there you can select mute subtitles. So I'm going to now pass you over to tonight's first speaker, that's Pete Wharmby. Feel free to start whenever you feel ready, Pete, and thank you again for joining us this evening.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me. It's the second one of these I've done. I did one a few years ago, which was really good. So it's great to come back and talk to you tonight about school reluctance and school avoidance. So I mean, just a bit of information about me, so that you know that I'm not just some guy who's just appeared. As you know, my name's Pete Wharmby. I'm an autistic writer primarily, I suppose, really these days, an advocate, and I tweet a lot and all that kind of thing. The important thing is that I was diagnosed as autistic when I was 34, so a lot of what I talk about, and when I look back at, in a moment when I look back at my own kind of school days, that's all through the lens of not knowing at the time that I was autistic. Everything's been very retrospective for me. So, that's slightly different to how it will be for a lot of people who, while they're students at school, know full well that they are autistic. And obviously that has a big impact and, on how they view school and how they interact with school. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, school avoidance, it is a very big topic. I'm not surprised to see that there are a lot of people here tonight to talk about this. I mean, as issues go, it is a very, very big one, especially for the autistic and neurodiverse community. I think the reason for that is because primarily, out of all the things that we have to do as parents, I mean, I'm a parent too of a almost certainly autistic child. We haven't had it, formally diagnosed yet, but I mean, I'm pretty sure. One of the biggest kind of expectations of us is that we will do what is right for our kids, and of course, a big part of that is we will send them to school, and that will, that's hugely important, and that's kind of seen as a societal kind of minimum. That that is something that we will do. So, what happens when our children refuse to go? And the kind of ramifications that has, it can feel very, very frightening, and all kinds of things can be bandied around, like you have legal obligations to send your child to school and all that kind of thing. So it can get very, very intense, very scary. So as I say, I'm not surprised there's a lot of people here tonight to talk about that, because it's a big deal. But what I'm going to try and do is primarily look at it from the autistic person's point of view. So, as I said, for me that will be retrospective, looking back at my own childhood and my own experience of school avoidance, and also just thinking about the more general issues and reasons why school avoidance is something that the autistic, the autistic school child community obviously has to deal with on quite a regular basis. There are a lot of autistic students, autistic children who do find themselves in a situation where they don't want to be attending school for whatever reason. So I'll be having a look at why that might be, and also what can we do to try and help the situation out. Okay. First and foremost, though, what I want to really set my stall out is that when it comes to school avoidance, there tends to be an awful lot of, I suppose, what we would call victim blaming. if we take the student, the child, to be the victim, for want of a better word, I mean, ultimately, when it comes to not wanting to go to school for whatever those reasons are, it's going to be the child that's going to be missing out on education and socializing and all those, apparently very positive aspects of school. And yet I think that very, very frequently the autistic child, is seen as being the difficult one, the tricky one, the one that's causing the problem. And what I'd like to do is just kind of flip that around completely, and hopefully, allow us to recognize, if we haven't already, that actually it's the other way around, that the child is actually having to respond to difficulties set upon them by other agencies, i.e. the school itself, the people within the school, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's kind of the way that I'm going to be approaching this, looking at it very much from that autistic point of view, with sympathy and with compassion. Okay, so I suppose I am autistic and I do have personal experience in this area, so I'm going to start by kind of flitting back in my memory to those early days of what it was like to be, however, 13, 14 years old or so, as an autistic child growing up in the UK in the mid-90s. And for me, school avoidance, it never quite got to the stage of me kind of putting my foot down very firmly and saying, I'm not doing this to myself anymore. Which is actually, to my respect, and I've got an awful lot of respect actually for children that are confident enough to say, I'm not putting myself through this anymore, mum, dad, this is something I can't do. I never had the kind of guts or the gumption to do that. I was always far too nervous and reserved and quiet and timid. I couldn't assert myself like that. So for me, school avoidance, came along in the usual sort of semi-school avoidance fashion, which is basically, I'm ill, mum, I can't go in, I'm poorly. Probably every 4 or 5 days I would say that, and I would try to find ways to be able to avoid going in without having to actually state boldly, I'm not going in. So I would tell my mum that I had a sore tummy or a headache or whatever it might be that might, garner the sympathy that would enable me to not have to go in. A lot of the time it was actually accurate. I was actually suffering from physical symptoms, and looking back, I think that a lot of those physical symptoms, especially the headaches, were actually a manifestation of the stress that I was under, as an autistic child trying to cope with being at school. So in some ways, I don't even think I was really, being duplicitous or cheating the system in any way. I think a lot of the time the discomfort and the pain was very real, and therefore, yes, I did have a significant amount of time off, far more than my peers. Way more time off than any of my friends did. And, it was commented on, and it was noted, and I had meetings with teachers and head teachers and all of that kind of thing throughout my entire school career. But luckily, I suppose, from my point of view, it never really went beyond that. I managed to just glide under the radar in that way that I've always managed to do, just to avoid any kind of upset or avoid any crosswords being spoken. But I do remember some very vivid key moments, and that's I suppose the main thing that I want to talk about at this point. One of those was, I think I was probably actually quite old at this point. I think I was probably about 15 or so, so kind of mid-teens, and I'd moved school, which is a big factor in all of this. Moving school, going from one place to another, changing routine, changing characters and faces and people, really huge problem for the majority of autistic people. And I had a particular issue with what was known as games, which was basically just PE, but on a Friday they gave it a different name and called it games. I don't know why. I think it was like a double period, so we had to do it for even longer than normal. And it was very much seen as, we are going to play a proper game of something in this time period, like a proper game of football or a proper game of, I don't know, rugby, cricket, whatever those sports are that, pretty alien to me then, and they are really now. And I hated it. I absolutely despised this. I found sport to be tremendously confusing. No one ever explained the rules as to what you actually had to do. You just had to kind of pick them up. And if you're autistic, picking up on unspoken rules is like kind of our whole problem. So it was a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. And I remember vividly every Friday morning that I had to do this for 2 years or so, I would stay at home. I didn't live very far away from school. I would stay at home till the very last possible moment that I could leave and not get into trouble. And I would be sitting on the sofa, basically, as close to kind of catatonic as you can imagine. I can't remember there even being any thoughts in my head, apart from just sheer panic, just absolute panic. Like, what can I do? What can I possibly do to get myself out of this at this late stage? Again. And just eventually managing to kind of drag myself from the sofa and move outside and walk to school slower than I believe anyone's ever walked to anything, the whole time desperately kind of my brain whirring for what could I come up with, aliens come in and getting me, or or even darker thoughts like, well, what if I just kind of ran off? What would happen then? What would occur if I did that? And that was every week for 2 years that I had that kind of that feeling, and it didn't go away until after games had finished. I had it for the entire morning, so there were 2 lessons before games, English, science, whatever, where I was completely incapable of taking anything in during those lessons. I don't think I learned a thing in those lessons at all. They may as well have been, written off, because I was fixated on the stress and the terror of what was coming. And I think what made it even worse, it's one thing to be kind of nervous and scared about what might be, which is obviously what this often was, but it's when you get that fear confirmed, when it goes from being theoretical to being very real. So for example, you go to a game session, one of them, and it's just particularly bad, and like, I don't know, the football teacher has a real go at you for not understanding the rules, or you get mocked by all of your peers for not knowing what you're doing, or for missing a header, or for I'm very tall, so I was always getting a lot of grief for the fact that I couldn't do tall footballer things, like head the ball, or hold up the ball, all those things that tall footballers are meant to be able to do. Of course I couldn't do them. I'm dyspraxic, almost certainly. I can't see the ball coming to me, I can't react to it. But anyway, sometimes my fears were realized, and the experience was even worse than I thought it might be, and of course that just compounds it and makes it worse and worse and worse. And if I'm completely honest, looking back at those school days, I would say that kind of negative, terribly negative experience of games every week is probably the standout memory of those years at school. It's more vivid to me than my friends, my small group of friends, or the lessons that I did, or anything really. If I think if I take my mind back to year 10 and year 11 at a secondary school, that is what I think about. So yeah, just as a bit of an illustration as to how this kind of might work for some autistic students, that's kind of how severe it was for me. There were other things too, I started skipping school from being poorly way back at primary school, like way back when I was about 5 years old, just desperately terrified of so many things to do with school, so many kind of multitudinous and sometimes quite subtle and tiny little things about school that just made it completely, too difficult for me to be able to cope with. But I'll go over those a little bit more when we talk about, the reasons why so many autistic children have so many issues with this. Okay, so that's a bit of personal experience. I've also got experience from the other point of view, which is as a teacher. I taught for 13 years, an English teacher at a secondary school. So, I've seen my, fair share of autistic, especially autistic students who have been school avoiders and school refusers, most of whom eventually managed to, kind of find a way to start coming in regularly, and many of whom ended up coming in every day and having what you call a normal school life, but not without having to go through an awful lot of stress and pain and pressure beforehand. So from a teacher's point of view, there are a few students and kind of occasions that stand out to me, and one of those was a student that, yes, from the beginning of year 7, from the time they moved up from primary school to, I think it's fair to say, it must have been year 11, they spent time outside the school, with their parents every single morning, and it was a fight for them to come in. And I'm not going to say it was a fight to get them in, because I don't think that's fair. It may well have felt like that for the parents and for the teachers, but for the student themselves, it was a fight for them, to be able to allow themselves to enter into that environment that clearly caused them significant distress, whether, real or theoretical, as I've said. But as I mentioned, this student did manage it in the end, even though it was a very, very difficult thing every day, every term, every week, having that struggle. They made it in. I remember I taught them for probably year 9, year 10, and year 11 for English, and then I taught them again for A level, and they made it through their entire A level. They went away with good A levels, and the last I heard, well, actually, I saw them in the street a few weeks back, and they've got a great job in town, and they're doing brilliantly. So, I mean, that's an individual, very positive story. But it's interesting to me how, a student that had such difficulty managing to get into school managed in the end to, have a completely ordinary adult life, which is what they have now. So yeah, I'm coming at it from 2 points of view there. Previous student not knowing I was autistic, and teacher very much knowing that I was. So they're my kind of viewpoints. Anyway, what does it boil down to, though? Why is it then that some autistic students, because it's not all of them by any stretch, not all autistic students will have school refusal as a thing going on for them. It's only a certain number of them. But why? And I've given this an awful lot of thought over the last few years, really, and I've boiled it down to 3 things. To be honest, I boiled it down to like 3 key kind of moments, and being the way I am, I've managed to make them all begin with the letter P, which I'm quite proud of, because alliteration and groups of 3, that's what everyone likes. It sticks in your memory, it's all good. So I've narrowed it all down to 3 factors, okay, that have to be taken into account for students who are school refusers, and that is the personal, the peers, and the professional. Okay, so the personal is the things that are going on inside the student's own mind and life. Okay, so the reasons they personally have to not be able to go into school, to not want to go into school, however it might manifest. The peer aspect is the impact of the other people around them, specifically their school peers, so the other children, basically. Okay, because obviously they can and do have a huge impact on how autistic students kind of view school, and whether they see it as a calm and kind of meaningful place, or a hostile and kind of pointless place to be. A lot of that can be down to the actions and the behavior of their peers. And then the professional, which is basically the teachers, the staff, the senior team, the head teacher, the culture of the school generally. Okay, and I think it's fair to say that certainly in my experience of school refusal, looking at it from the outside, looking at students who have refused to come into the school that I was teaching at, and in conversation with an awful lot of autistic people, on Twitter. I've spoken recently to lots and lots of autistic people on Twitter about this topic, kind of gathering ideas and whatnot, to try and expand my understanding even further. And I think there's a tendency for us to put all of it on the personal, to put all of it onto the autistic child. What can we do to them to make them want to go into school? From basic things like either offering them positive treats and that kind of thing, to warning them and telling them off, if you don't go in there in a minute, you're going to be in trouble, all that kind of thing. But to more complex things, like well, let's sit down and do an action plan with you about what you can really work on to enable you to come back into school. What can you do to make it so that you can come back in? Oftentimes it's very much focused and fixated on that personal, and it's my view, as it is with nearly everything to do with autism, that actually what you need to do is take a pretty big step back and say, well, actually this person's already struggling enormously, to the point where they're not able to do their daily routine at all, and they're having their relationships are deteriorating with the people around them because they're very stressed and they're very unhappy all of the time, and yet here we are trying to get them to do more, and trying to get them to kind of push their boundaries even further, and to me that doesn't really seem like the most sensible way to look at things. And I mean, I'm not saying for a moment that this is, the norm across the world. I mean, it's not. There are plenty of schools and establishments which do things in a more compassionate way. But certainly, generically, this has been, I think, the kind of way that things have worked for a long, long time. What we need to do, in my opinion, is focus more on the professional. The peers aspect, that comes later. That's something slightly different. I think we need to focus on the professional. We need to focus on the school culture, the school environment, and ensure that the school is doing everything that it can to make it so that that school is a safe and calm and welcoming and pleasing environment. And I think it's fair to say that, let's be honest, the vast majority of schools are aware of this, and they can be very good at making sure that they're doing some things very, very well. I think it's my concern that often it just doesn't quite go far enough, and a lot of that, I think, is based on just a bit of a lack of understanding of exactly what it is like for the autistic child who's refusing to go to school. What's driving that and what's causing that? Because I fervently believe that if you could take, imagine like a thought experiment. It could never sadly actually happen, but imagine getting all the head teachers from all the secondary schools across Ireland, the UK, America, well, Europe, everyone. Why not just everybody, all together, like in a big room, and somehow using either magic or technology allow them to kind of actually experience and inhabit the mind of your typical autistic student who's struggling to be able to cope with going into school. Just get them to live it just for I don't think they'd want to do it for more than 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes they'd be saying, please stop, I don't want to be doing this anymore. I've often felt that, if non-autistic people could feel what it's like in our heads, I think a lot of the time they would be hitting the panic button, no, please let me out, because it's from what I can gather, it's very different. It's a very different experience to be neurodivergent. The way that the mind works, the kind of the assault on the senses, our hypersensitivity to everything, sight, brightness, smell, colors, sounds, and all the rest of it. Very intense indeed. And that's just the sensory stuff. I mean, it goes way beyond that. So yeah, I mean, I often think that how wonderful it would be to just kind of really, really show these people what it's actually like. And then what you might start to see is a shift, is a culture shift within education generally, to really put the onus on the schools, and on the schools kind of adapting and establishing themselves as genuinely positive and safe spaces to be autistic in. And I think if that was achieved, then I think we would see some improvement in school refusal rates and that kind of thing. But let's take it step by step. So when we talk about these three things, personal, peer, and professional, these three kind of factors that have to be taken into account. Well, the personal stuff is going to be the reasons that the student has for not wanting to go into school, whatever they may be. And they may be able to communicate those to you, or they may not be able to. They might not choose to, or they might simply not be able to. Like, it's just too kind of complex a concept for them to actually put into words for you. And I think, we have to just be mindful of that. I mean, I remember that my feeling of terror about going into school, for games on a Friday was so sort of instinct led and inherent to within my kind of brain and body kind of thing, that I think I would have struggled even at the age of 15, even as someone who was relatively good at English and writing and talking and that kind of thing. I would have struggled to have got that across to anybody that asked. I mean, nobody ever did, because nobody ever noticed this about me. I think even if my parents were watching this now, they'd be saying, really? Nobody kind of got that from me, because I was very adept at masking it, very, very good at hiding all of this kind of turmoil. Like they say, like a swan, on the surface, and their legs are kicking away underneath. I was very good at being that swan, of just looking completely, yeah, I'm fine, no problems here, when actually things were very, very bad underneath. So these students they will have valid reasons for not wanting to go in. There will be reasons that to them are absolutely undeniable and completely valid for not wanting to go in. And I think that they're the things that we try to kind of poke at and try to talk them round on, like, oh, I don't want to go in because, there's that teacher who's really horrible to me. And, I never know whether they're in a good mood or whether they're in a bad mood. And they always seem to just pick on me for no apparent reason. So we say to them, well, try not to worry about it. Let's try and get you to just kind of keep your head down in those lessons, etc., etc. Then you've got the peer aspect. Okay, so this is the this is the other kids. Okay, and I suppose the key way that this is going to come across is the kind of how the other kids are going to react and respond to the autistic child. Okay, kind of before they start refusing school, if you like, and what we're talking about here, of course, is bullying and mockery and lack of understanding, lack of acceptance into the kind of group of children, which is something that is very much peer-led, driven by the other children in the class or in the school, and that, of course, is something that would need to be worked on. That's something that needs to be adjusted and carefully managed, but of course not by the autistic child. That is not something that you can expect the autistic child to figure out or to mold into a shape that they can handle. It's about social interaction. So the very idea of an autistic child being able to go and figure out these issues with their peer group is just nonsensical. It's not going to happen. It's got to be led by the staff. It's got to be led by the school. The school's culture and that professional change of culture and acceptance of what autism really is has to involve and include and embrace, really, the other children in the school, the non-autistic children. It has to work to make them better at accepting difference and accepting the fact that there are going to be people in their class who they might be sitting at desks with who just do things differently to how they do things. And then that aspect, that factor, can maybe start to improve, okay, which then will obviously improve the personal. It might start to strike off issues why the child feels they can't go in. If one of those issues, I'm going to get bullied, well, what if we actually properly address that and start to figure that out? Anyway, professional then, in terms of the professional stuff, the things that the school can do. Well, as I've said, I think I've mentioned it a few times now, it's about culture. It's about changing how the school kind of operates and how it looks at autistic students and how it tries to make itself welcoming and open and accepting to them. And I think that is where everything has always got to start with school refusal. It really has to be from that level, because frankly, the school is the only kind of party involved in any way, shape or form that has the capacity to make any kind of changes that are required. The student doesn't. The student, as I said, is already at their limit. They can't realistically or reasonably do any more. The peers are powerless. They are very much led by the culture of the school. And I suppose the fourth P would be parents. And what can the parents do? Well, all the parents can really do is either badger the school and try to do the right thing, which is get the school to change their to adapt themselves better for their child, or of course try and get the child to change their ways. That's kind of the only options that you've really got as a parent in these scenarios. You either go one way or the other, or you can try and do both. And again, it won't come as a surprise. It's my belief that time spent directing parental kind of energy into that kind of culture change, that large scale change on a school-wide level is going to be more beneficial than that pressure applied to the child, to try to get them to go in. So with that in mind, then, basically what I'm saying here is that, the onus is on the school, and it kind of has to be, because it can't be on anybody else. Not really, not realistically. So what do the schools need to know then? What do the schools need to know about, why autistic children are, refusing to go in, refusing to go through those doors in the morning, or if they do make it into school, refusing to go to lessons, or refusing to do anything other than just kind of wander around hoping that nobody's going to notice that they're not in lessons. And I mean, this is where I could talk for probably 2 days if I really wanted to. I could go on and on about this for a very, very long time, about just the vast number of things within a school that makes a school, either primary, secondary, even college, just a kind of almost uniquely hostile place for autistic students generally. But of course, we haven't got time, so I'll try and keep it nice and quick. Okay, so reasons why school is going to cause problems for autistic children. Well, first of all, you've got that social issue. Okay, fact of the matter is that nearly all autistic people, their primary kind of disability, if you like, is social communication. Okay, so just, I mean, for me, for example, it manifests in, I don't know whether someone's joking or not. I don't know whether someone's being sarcastic or whether they're not. I know sarcasm, but I don't know necessarily whether someone's utilizing it or not. Like if somebody's sarcastic to me, I have to kind of, like, are you doing that thing now, or are you being deadly serious? Because I really can't tell. And not knowing when to change topics of conversation, not realizing that people don't like being talked at for hours about, Sonic the Hedgehog or dinosaurs or horse riding or whatever it might be, that kind of understanding, and so on and so forth. Autistic students are up against it from the beginning because schools for children, in their peer group of other children, are intensely social zones. They really are, and they are merciless and pitiless in how they, assert that social kind of power. If you don't fit into the mold, if you don't come across as being normal, like everybody else, then the punishments are immediate and they're tremendously harsh. So the whole fact of going into school and having to basically just face up to that every single day of every single week of every single year that you're at school is something that I think would make anybody, quite frankly, kind of think, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to walk into that kind of social nightmare of just people being horrible to me just because I don't know the rules of socializing, because I talk too much or I talk too little or I talk with an odd inflection or whatever it might be. It's it's a very, very, very difficult thing to be able to face up to doing every single day. So you've got the social aspect, and the reason why, if you ask any student, any autistic student, it's very likely that when you ask them, what's your least favorite time of day, that they probably won't say, I don't know, science or math, I hate maths, or I don't like English. Chances are actually quite high. They'll say like break or lunchtime are by far the worst times of day, because that's when you have to face that kind of wall of social exclusion and confusion, on a daily basis, twice a day, and you're made to do it as well. You got to go outside, kids. Out you go into the playground. Go out there and just good luck. and it's awful. It really is. So that social aspect is going to be a big reason why autistic students are going to say no, not doing that. Then you've got the censoring. You've got the fact that schools, they're getting better, but they are pretty much still uniquely well designed to really bother autistic sensitivities. Everything about school design seems to want to make autistic people kind of curl up in a corner and wait for it all to blow over. From the bright fluorescent strip lighting to the massive, highly decorated displays on the walls that autistic children can't help but fixate on and kind of weirdly feel like they need to read it all when they're meant to be paying attention. To the whirring of the projectors. Tell you what, as a teacher, the noise my projector made, it drove me to distraction. I had to turn it off whenever it wasn't being used. I had to turn it off because that endless whir, kind of sound, absolute, just painful. Hated it, absolutely hated it. And that's going to be the same for an awful lot of autistic children. And then, of course, the relative, quiet. Okay, it's annoying, but at least it's still quite quiet. Of that burring, humming sound of the projector is suddenly broken by the bell going. Because it's lunchtime. Because for some reason in schools we like to announce everything that happens with a short burst of intense noise, just to really ruin a person's day. And that's before you factor in anything else like shouting kids or shouting teachers, even more so. Nothing more terrifying than a genuinely angry teacher. To fire drills and school trips with a whole new kind of world of different stresses and strains going on. It's looking back, I don't know how I did it. I really don't. I don't know how I managed to cope, and I can certainly understand why I needed so many days off sick. And when I talk to any autistic child, especially who does school reviews, I can't help but approach them with a sense of, you too? Yeah, I understand. I get that. And of course, the child has no power to change any of that stuff. They really don't. The parents do to an extent. The parents might be able to sit down with the head teacher and, I don't know, thrash out a few adjustments, reasonable adjustments to make things easier. But, when you're doing that for every single little thing on an individual basis, and, you're doing it, and then a friend that is doing it for their autistic child, kind of they're having to do it too, like separately. It's like, what waste of time? Wouldn't it be better for the school to just kind of know that these are the barriers? These are the things that are going to kind of across the board cause issues for autistic students, and therefore, well, maybe we need to do something about them. So that's where the professional comes in. That's where the school comes in as being in a position where they can change their culture, they can change their environment, they can make the school environment that the children live and breathe in a far more welcoming and far less hostile space. And obviously, I mean, here I am, saying this. As far as I'm aware, there are no kind of, politicians or secretaries of state for education in the audience. So, we're all limited in what we can do, of course, as just individuals. I've got my Twitter account. I just, type things out and press send and hope that, people listen. But, I think with that kind of understanding and awareness that, it's the schools that have to do something with that out there. If we exert that pressure kind of on a uniform level, just kind of, we all just kind of push a little bit more, then perhaps we can affect change. Because what we need to see is for schools across Ireland, across the UK, to really step up and to kind of try and make it so that, any reason for school refusal or school avoidance that can be addressed, which is a lot, there are a lot, will be addressed. So, for example, there would be nothing stopping at all, schools kind of really pushing and really working on things such as their lighting. The lighting in their buildings, and the need for displays and colourful posters everywhere. Really tone that down a little bit, make it so that the environment is a little bit less visually intense for autistic students, and that would have a tiny effect. That alone would have a small effect, and it might be one more student feels just a little bit more able to go in that day, because they don't feel like they're going to be kind of assaulted by the detail and the brightness of everything on the walls. Similarly, schools kind of making it a thing where you're not allowed those kind of smelly air fresheners or those diffuser things, with the reeds and the kind of pot of perfumed liquid that kind of spreads a strong stench around the place, sandalwood or whatever it might be. That kind of it might smell nice to you, but I can assure you that to an awful lot of autistic children, it's kind of clogs up your nostrils and it makes you feel sick, and it makes you kind of want to, I don't know, I don't really know how to explain it even now. The impact of a particularly strong smell, even if it's pleasant, is so intense. I remember, there was a student at school who just wouldn't go into a particular classroom because the teacher wore too much perfume. And it took ages to kind of get that out of them, because they were, they were, they didn't want to upset the teacher. This was a real problem. But, the student, fair play, didn't want to make the teacher feel bad, because it's kind of personal, and so you need to, again, take a step back and, maybe do we need to do a thing where, okay, teaching staff, if you must wear something, deodorant or something, fair enough, but, can we make it as unintrusive as possible, to try to, really reduce that potential for problems, there. All the way to big scale things, and this is something that I wrote about in, just finished writing a book, and I spoke about it quite a lot, about things like layouts in classrooms, and this disturbing kind of focus on having autistic students because they're disabled and therefore need special adjustments being kind of placed front and center in a classroom. It's like, no, don't do that. Do not do that to an autistic child. Don't unless they specifically want to. I mean, some autistic kids, they love doing drama and stuff like that, and they probably quite enjoy it. But I think it's safe to say the vast majority of autistic kids, they want to sit at the back in the corner where they can doodle without being told off. Where they can stim a little bit. There's little movements just to calm them down without anyone noticing. Yet there's this weird thing of, bring them to the front, sit right at the front there in front of the teacher. It's a punishment, if anything. It's a punishment. So I'm reading some of the comments coming in, and I understand, what position are we in to affect a change like this? But I'm a big kind of believer in, with enough of us all kind of singing the same hymn and pushing the same way, we can make change happen. And they're just some of the very small and very easy things that schools can do just to make themselves a bit less hostile to autistic kids. But let's just take, my time's nearly run out. So if I just take a step back, when I look back at, my, 15-year-old self, when I was struggling to go in, and when I was, feeling like it was just impossible to go in day after day, I can look back and I can identify key things that any member of staff could have done just to make it so much better, so much better. All it would have taken was for the PE games teacher, for example, to have said to me, don't worry about it. Pete, I know you missed that header. Don't worry. You tried. It's fine. And that, honestly, that would have been enough. It sounds so daft because, surely that's what teachers should be doing. But, this was 1998. So, teachers weren't like that back then. But, it would have been a very tiny thing, very little bit of compassion from a teacher there would have, changed my entire experience there, of that particular issue. Similarly, having somebody who understood, the fact that I didn't want to be sitting, as I said, right front and center, in the thick of it. I wanted to be far back, and I wanted to be allowed to doodle. I wanted to be allowed to fiddle, constantly. While I've been doing this, I've been playing with like a little Lego man the whole time, because I'm 38 now, but I still need to stim. I still need to fiddle with things when I'm feeling stressed. So, but I wasn't allowed to. So it was a completely different thing. I was ostracized and made to feel bad about that. So yeah, it's hard for us to make any kind of difference. We can push and we can push, but I truly believe that the onus is on the schools. That they're the only ones that have any power at all to make any change in any of this, and putting the onus, like I said at the beginning, this victim blaming culture of it being the kid's fault, of the kid being difficult, of the kid being awkward, and it being a fight, to drag the kid in every day, is just the wrong way to look at it. And cause just exacerbates the problems terribly, really. So we need to shift that kind of perception from it being all about the kid, all about the personal, to being the professional, to being about it's the professionals that need to do something. After all, they're the professionals, so there we go. But I've got a lot of teacher educator people that follow me on Twitter, so I carry on banging the drum. But yes, they're certainly my thoughts on the topic, and I think that's all my time.
Thank you very much, Pete, for that. It's brilliant. We have some questions coming in there as well. If you do have a question for Pete, could you guys just pop it in the Q&A box, and we'll come to it just at the end. I'm going to pass over now to Lauren Ann. If you're there you are. How are you, Lauren? Just whenever you feel ready, you can get started.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Lauren. I'm 20 years old, and I was diagnosed with Asperger's when I was 15. So 5 years ago now. I'm currently studying law. I'm in my second year, but today I'm going to talk about my experience in primary and secondary school. So as I said, I was diagnosed at 15, and that meant for most of my primary school education, I wasn't aware that I was autistic. And sadly, this is the case for many students, especially girls, who are statistically diagnosed much later than boys, or just not diagnosed at all. So it is always important to keep in mind that even though the diagnosis might not be there, it doesn't mean that the issues aren't still legitimate. Um, so yeah, however, like now retrospectively, I can reflect on my primary level education, and I'm able to identify some of the particular challenges I faced in school, and now I can make sense of them. So I'll share these challenges with you, and I'll also discuss ways that I found helpful in overcoming them. But in saying this, it's important to remember that this is just my own experience, and what worked for me is not guaranteed to work for another student. It's really about trial and error, to find what's most effective for that individual. It's also beneficial to give every technique that you try an ample time period so that they can adjust to that technique and get used to it, and it can become part of the school routine. And then you can accordingly assess if implementing these changes is indeed helpful. So for the most part, I had an enjoyable primary school experience. The predictability of having the same classroom, the same teacher, the same classmates, and just the same general daily routine was very appealing to me. I remember one of the teachers that I had, I think it was in first class, she would always, the first thing she would do every day was write down a very comprehensive like plan for the day of, so it might have been like, okay, 9 to 10, we're going to do maths. 10 to 11, we're going to do English. And she'd check it off as we progressed through those tasks. And if we didn't get to the end, by the time the school day finished, I'd know going in the next day that whatever was last on the list was going to be the first thing that we did the next day. So it was nice to kind of have that knowledge. So obviously the classroom can be a very chaotic place for anyone, but especially for someone with autism, the lights, the noise, the stimulation is going to be amplified in their mind. So for me, keeping a routine amongst the chaos was at least some form of respite and certainty and order. So unfortunately, limitations in this will exist, and it's not possible to timetable for everything ever. But regularly reminding students that sometimes there may be changes to schedules, and kind of help ease them when they're feeling overwhelmed with unexpected things that might arise. When I was younger and there was a sudden change of plan, I would become extremely agitated. So things like, for example, special interests, like I was super into animals. So things like just writing a list of all of the names of dog breeds that I could think of, that really helped redirect my focus and calm me down. So if like an autistic student does have a special topic, do take an interest in it and allow them to utilize it, because it can be very helpful in times of stress and change. So like, I don't know if there are any teachers here, but giving them a piece of paper and asking them to make a list relevant to their special topic. So it could be like characters in favorite TV show or planets in the solar system, can be helpful. Just for a brief period of change to help their mind redirect itself and focus. And especially for younger students, even taking up that list once it's done and correcting it and handing it back like a piece of work can be very encouraging because they did accomplish something and they were able to get over a very stressful situation, and that should really be acknowledged. So I'm not sure how many schools this will apply to, but from my own experience, every 2 years, the classes will be reshuffled. So you wouldn't only have a new teacher, you'd have a new classroom, a new just class, different students. You didn't know anyone. So this was really challenging for me because you would have spent the last year just about adjusting to everyone and getting to know people and finally becoming comfortable with these people, and then you have to do it all again. So I do understand why this system is in place and why schools would be reluctant to change it, but a good way of managing it or limiting the stress and the anxiety that it would provoke in students, which I found was like a friendship or a buddy sheet. This obviously has inherent disadvantages, but at least giving an autistic student the comfort of knowing, okay, I know this person, I'm going to have this person with me for sure. That can really, really help. And the same goes, I found, in group projects or just when you're working together with classmates. It can be really daunting. So just maybe sticking with the same group, or if you notice like a child takes a particular liking or gets on with another child, to kind of keep them together is really helpful. So yeah, to conclude on my primary school experience, I'll talk about which was what was my most prevalent challenge, and that was headaches. I was affected by them severely every day after school. I would come home with just the worst headaches, and it got to the stage where my mom was bringing me to A&E constantly because we just didn't understand what was going wrong. And A&E would just turn us around and just be like, there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe you're a bit dehydrated, but you're fine. And now I know that I was fine, but what wasn't fine was my ability to process the sensory stimulation around me. So being an extremely introverted child, I can now recognize that I was internalizing my difficulties with the perpetual sensory stimulation of the classroom, only for these difficulties to manifest in headaches and fatigue when I had reached a comfortable environment, which was home. So I think having some form of like respite to break up the school day really could have benefited me there. This could be by setting up a corner in the classroom, maybe a more quiet area in the classroom, and allowing a student to wear noise cancelling headphones or do some coloring or just read a book, or if it is possible for an SNA to bring them on a walk when the playground isn't busy, just to kind of just to refresh yourself and then to be able to manage for the rest of the day. Just whatever helps that particular student reset. So like many other autistic students, and really just the majority of students in general, I found the transition from primary school to secondary school almost insurmountable. However, preliminary transitions in my school was made easier by this welcome program we had. So basically what that involved was when you were still in 6th class, you would go into the school maybe once every 2 months, and you get to know the teachers, you get to know the school layout, you get to know the students who are going to be in your class. So that really helped me get comfortable with what I was going to be adjusting to next year. So maybe running that more regularly, or if it's not available in a secondary school that the child is going to go to, maybe requesting it, even just you get to go in there before you agree to go to the school and meet the teachers and just get to know the environment. It made the first real day of secondary school a lot easier to cope with. But adjusting to primary, from primary to secondary school, is not the only transitional period that I struggled with. I personally found that the beginning of each new academic term or even a midterm break was really difficult. So I think going back can be a lot to just adjust to being home. And then you have to readjust to going back into school every day and being there all day, every day. So even I found that the first week back, going in for maybe a half day for the first week or whatever works for that particular person can really just help you just familiarize yourself with the system, and it can be a lot less exhausting because change is so exhausting, and if it all comes at once, it can just encourage a student to not want to do it at all. So yeah, also a parent and I were permitted to go into school before the term started, and kind of in secondary school set up my locker and stuff like that. So I knew where I was going. I knew I could organize my books like I wanted to. I didn't have to feel rushed, and I didn't have to do it when there were hundreds of other people around me. So that was helpful too. And timetables are always important in this way. But in transition year, I found that the lack of timetables was particularly challenging. So I know that transition year exists to be a time of like personal growth and getting to know yourself and what you want to do. But I found for myself and a lot of other autistic students, it can just be the complete opposite of that. It can just be a year of regression. It's just the unstructuredness relative to the other school years, and the objective of like pushing students to broaden their horizons and try new things is just, it can just be too much. So ideally a student on the spectrum should be given a clear and comprehensive schedule of the events and activities which are intended to take place. And it should be made clear that they're welcome to participate, but there shouldn't be any pressure or there shouldn't be any punishment if they decide not to. Also in my school, I found that it was an issue that a lot of the activities scheduled just weren't friendly to people with sensory processing difficulties. I think that like a trip to a museum or like a petting farm or something like that is kind of inclusive of everyone, whereas like laser tag or sailing or the cinema even, it can be very exclusive. But yeah, in my experience, school worked for me because I was lucky enough that my school allowed me to approach my education individualistically. They were very open to facilitation, and in accordance with my parents and my occupational therapist, we were able to kind of work my schedule so I didn't have to come in all of the time, and especially towards the leaving cert, they stopped giving me homework. They just told me to work on things that I know I needed to work on, because a lot of autistic people will know that in a way. Like, it's just not logical that you have to sit here and listen to all of these things that you're revising that you already know, but it's exhausting to do so. So you would be much better off at home or in the library, or even in the back of the classroom, towards exam seasons, focusing on what you know you need to focus on. Sweeping statements were a massive issue for me. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time, I'll finish now. Sweeping statements were a massive issue for me because I attended a very high achieving private school in South Dublin. So they were always like, oh, you have to study for 6 hours every single night on top of your homework and on top of your schoolwork, or you're not going to fail or you're not going to pass. So I took this to heart completely because a lot of autistic people will take everything literally. I know now they were only trying to scare people. But I took it to heart. I did all of the work and I know I couldn't do it. I wasn't able to do it. I was exhausted. So I decided this summer before sixth year, I would spend my whole summer studying because I thought I needed to know all of these things, but I wouldn't be able to learn them throughout the academic year because I'd be in the class and I'd be exhausted from sensory processing. So at home during the summer it was perfect. And I thought that if I didn't do this work, I wouldn't pass the Leaving Cert, let alone do well in it, because that's the narrative that my school pushed. But yeah, that was a disaster. I completely became obsessed and compulsive in that way. I just locked my room, had all of my books in there and just sat at my desk and studied 13 hours a day, didn't talk to anyone, didn't eat. And that basically resulted in me not being able to do the Leaving Cert the next year at all because I had completely burnt myself out. So just sweeping statements are a massive issue, and pressure will often be taken to heart. So it's important to keep in mind that, and I'll finish on this, I think that the school system is just inherently so structured and so rigid that it has very little room for individualizing someone's education. So I think that the main goal, especially for an autistic student, is just to get through it. And no matter what that means, if that means you can go in every day, great. If that means you can go in twice a week, great. If you can only do half days, whatever you're able to do and manage, because the school system has an emphasis on generalization. Everything is so broad, every subject, there's very little room for detailed focused minds, which many autistic people have. So it's just about getting through and then allowing them to move on to something which maybe they're interested in, their special interest, and pursue that later in life, because likely they will flourish there, because it's self-motivation. Like the self-motivation of an autistic person can truly be remarkable because you have that dedication, you have that willingness to be the best in what you are interested in because you enjoy it. And that's a really unique and really valuable thing. And that's what stands to you later in life. So I think my message is for school, just do whatever you can to get through it.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It was wonderful listening to you. Actually, I was really interested in all the stuff you had to say, brilliant even tips and guidance there for parents. And I know everyone else feels the same. I see some lovely comments coming in the comment box, so hopefully you'll have a look at all those. They're actually in the chat box, so make sure you have a look at them, Lauren. And a massive thanks to Pete as well for the presentation he gave us earlier on. And could I just mention, we're going on to Q&A now. So guys, if you do you want to pick some questions for the Q&A, or will we go through them together? I don't know if there's anyone that caught your eye there, Pete, when you were just looking through there.
To be honest, I was looking through.
That's fine.
I forgot there was a separate thing for the Q&A.
Yeah, there's a Q&A box there. There's a chat as well going on, but yeah, it's brilliant.
So if you just, by all means, just pick stuff out for me, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Someone mentioned something about a book. Do you have a book? to purchase, Pete? That's the first thing I saw.
Not yet. No.
Not yet.
There will be. There will be.
It's in the works.
But yeah, it's not coming out till next year. So I've just handed it in to my editor. I've kind of finished it, but then there's like the whole rigmarole that they go through. So
brilliant. There was one earlier on tonight. I'm not sure if any of you guys would have advice. This is like, how would I encourage my child to talk about what he doesn't like about school? He completely shuts down at the mere mention of school.
That's a difficult question, really. Because from my own experience of being autistic, if there's something I don't want to talk about, then you can move heaven and earth, and I'm still not going to talk about it. I think that the best thing to do is to try to kind of minimize what's the word, like minimize the importance of it, like make it feel like it's not a big deal, and make it very clear whose side you're on. That you're very much on their side. You just want to know because it will help everybody. Mostly them. Because from my own experience, the thing that I fear the most is criticism or people kind of taking back doors to tell me off, if you know what I mean. Like, people used to do that when I was a kid. They wouldn't just tell you off straightforwardly. There would always be like a weird meandering kind of way to get to it. I think kind of cutting that off and showing the child that that's not what's happening here. I'm being completely transparent and fair, and and that it's low stakes. That's the phrase I was looking for. Low stakes. Like it's no big deal. Just anything that you feel you can share, do. But even then, it's difficult because we can clam up when we want to, and I think it's about feeling safe. That's the thing that really helps.
So another one here. Any thoughts on how to deal with a 9-year-old whose reluctance is based on actual learning but not the school environment? Child is very intelligent but can't see the point of education, dislikes every subject, and describes spending 5 hours a day in school as torture.
Like I
agree.
Relate. I can relate to it.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about that, but I had to cut a few bits out, about one of the personal things students can have against school is exactly that. Like, this is boring. I'm actually, as Laura mentioned, a lot of autistic students are terrifically good independent learners, and very happy just figuring things out for themselves. I managed that when I was a kid. How it would be like now with Wikipedia and the internet, it'd be a whole, God, you could learn anything. It's but yeah, so you have this real problem where we're not learning fast enough, or we're not learning things that are interesting enough. They're just kind of all this stuff is boring. I read about this years ago, and the only advice I can really give is to, and I don't know how likely this is, but speak to the school, about, is there any way that they can have some lessons, in the library, just doing their own research? If they can just be taken out of normal classes for, I don't know, a couple of hours a week, just have a project. I always loved having a project to work on. Like, I had a teacher that told me wants to write a book about the planets, and I was like, yes, I am going to do that. And off I did. I did. Wrote this kind of A4 book about the planets with my own illustrations and stuff. I was happy. So that might be a way. I've worked with schools that have had that capacity to enable a kid to just go and work independently in like if the school has an SEN room or a library that they can use, and that can really help. Just a bit of a boost. During the week. A bit of independent fun learning.
Thanks for that. Sorry, I thought there was a question in the chat there that I missed. I just remember thinking that's a good one. And I'm like, I gotta find it. There's a general question actually in the Q&A box. Just throw it out there. I don't think it's directed at anyone. It's just would you agree there's a big difference between inclusion and meaningful inclusion? Any thoughts on that, either of you guys?
Yeah, I think it can even be applied to your peers in school. They can almost feel forced. You have to go out of your way to include this person. It's not natural. It can actually really damage that person's self-esteem because they're being told to include you. They're being told to be nice to you, whereas you kind of just want to be treated like everyone else because everyone is different. So in that way, you are like everyone else. So I think it can be damaging when it's not done correctly. I think the earlier it happens, the better. Like if you're just starting out in school with a new class or something, it's optimal to do it then, because like if a new student came to the school, the teacher would encourage you to include them anyway. That's completely natural, that's completely expected. But if it's kind of like a teacher noticing a person being left out, and they're like saying to the students, hey guys, you have to include this person, it can kind of be forced, and it can kind of cause a lot of resentment, because you're not, like, you just want people to spend time with you because they want to spend time with you. But it also depends on the student, which is being like told to include you. It can be, some people, like I've seen it myself, some people are very, very good at it, they know what they're doing. Other people will just treat you like you're, like they have to babysit you. So it's a very difficult thing to get right. It's hard to find a balance. It's important for everyone to be included, but it's important for everyone to be included equally. So I don't really know how to go about it in the right way myself. But I guess just if your child is being, if the teachers are encouraging other students to include them, and be very careful of how it's being done. That's all I would say.
Pete, would you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. You know, the you know, making them feel almost alien, you know, and like you're being treated specially is a horrible feeling. You know, it's like being, you know, allowed to win a game. You know, it's just the worst feeling. You know, it's happening. You know that it's because they all view you as bad, and therefore, you know, you get this little kind of boost to apparently cheer you up. You know, it's just awful. I mean, I would say that, you know, I mean, I'm quite evangelical about this, really, but for me, it's all about openness, and for students in schools to have a much better understanding themselves about what autism is, you know, because too often, you know, most kids at school have no idea, you know, they why would they have, you know, I mean, nobody ever tells them, you know, they're not just going to magically have it. But, you know, I was always completely open when I was back at school, you know, when I was a teacher. And we ended up having, I mean, I had a class where I had probably 4 or 5 autistic kids in year 11, so GCSE kind of, you know, the exam period time, you know, and I was openly autistic, and all the other kids knew. And you know, it was, the understanding in that room was fantastic. You know, it was just natural. It was just like, you know, because I had explained to the kids what autism really was and what it actually meant, you know, rather than stereotypes, there was just this kind of unspoken, just kind of, oh yeah, fair enough. So, you know, there was one time where they spotted that I was looking at maps while they were doing some work. And this is just a little thing, but, you know, I'm obsessed with maps. I love maps. And honestly, one of the non-autistic kids said, "Sir, you're looking at your maps again?" And I was like, "Yeah." And it was like, "Oh, good. Is that chilling you? You know, is that relaxing?" And I was like, "Yeah, it is actually." And they're like, "Oh, cool. Okay, fair enough." And it's just, you know, it's a whole different kind of level of discussion, and that comes with openness. And I think too often we say to kids, "Oh, you know, you got to treat such and such differently because, you know, they're SEN, you know, they've got autism," and that leads to a different place, you know, to just actually being open about what autism is, you know, doing assemblies on it perhaps, or just talking about it quite openly and quite happily, like it's just a normal, natural part of life, which of course it is. You know, the difference is startling. So that's something I will always push personally.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions just about reduced timetables. There's one here, just like what your thoughts on reduced curriculum, not as a cop-out, but if the parent and the teacher agree that the student can't cope with a full day.
I mean, personally, I don't know about Lauren, but I see it as perfectly valid. You know, it is a partial cop out on the part of the school, you know, as so many things always are, you know, because, you know, that's just how things work. But but it is at least recognizing the fact that the student is struggling, you know, and that they have too much on their plate. You know, at least it addresses that, which is better than nothing, you know. So just removing a little bit of that extra pressure. Similar can be said for not forcing them to do homework. I think that's a wonderful amendment that you can do. I mean, I don't know about in Ireland, but in the UK, that, you know, homework is kind of seen as this all important thing, you know, that all children must do loads of homework, and I just don't buy it. You know, I just don't get it at all. You know, and autistic kids don't. Yeah, exactly. Autistic kids are just like, look, I've done work at school. I've done that. You know, I'm not doing it at home as well. That's just mad. You know, so it's about, you know, actually saying to you, I mean, I've had plenty of autistic students who, if you take that extra pressure away, they thrive, because it's just that little bit of pressure release really helps.
Sure. Probably take one more here. Says, my daughter complains every day of tummy pains, and this talk has really opened my mind so much, so thank you. My daughter's school and I are learning together. They've been really supportive. I just wonder, in relation to the social anxiety, is it okay to ask if she gets the option to sit in and read a book and chill at break time, or is that counterproductive to assist her in developing her social skills? I have never pushed her to socialize if she was uncomfortable, so not sure about the school environment. Sorry if that's a bit long. Get all that, guys.
Sorry. No, I think that's a wonderful approach, and that quite reminds me of my own experience, actually. I don't think that having the option to read a book in class or even outside of class is counterproductive at all. I think it's a very good and progressive move, actually, because if you're forced to be around people all of the time, your social battery is just going to crash, and then you're going to get overwhelmed, and then you're going to struggle a lot, and you're not going to want to do it again. So it's about doing it in small, manageable steps. And like everyone needs a break. Even if you're not autistic, if you're an introvert, you can only manage so much time with people before you need to go and spend some time with yourself to recharge. So I think if that helps her get through the school day, I think it's very workable and it's very positive. And I know that that's something I did, and that's something which really, really just changed, completely transformed my school experience to be something so much more positive before that mechanism was in place.
Yeah, I mean, you know, from everything Lauren just said, completely. Yeah, totally agree. You know, game changer. I mean, one of the nicest things that I think any school can provide is a kind of friendly teacher that has their room open at lunchtime and break time. You know, I mean, obviously I was that teacher at school. You know, I mean, it was fine for my classroom was just filled with Lego, you know, on my school desk, and because that's one of my things. So I'd just have kids coming in and they'd sit and read quietly, or they'd just fiddle with some of the Lego, you know, just have a bit of a relaxing time, and I'd leave them to it, you know, completely just, you know, you do you, it's fine. I'll just eat my sandwich, you know. And if they wanted to share a bit of information about their special, you know, interests, then they could. And it was, you know, I think, you know, don't worry about pushing them to socialize. Like Lauren said, it just exhausts us, you know, especially when we feel like we don't really need to do it. We're just being kind of told to do it, you know, and that kind of kicks off that whole, you know, I'm not doing what I'm being told anyway kind of instinct, you know. So yeah, definitely fully agree there with Lauren there.
Guys, I think we'll leave it there, but I just want to say a massive thank you just to you both for just taking the time out this evening to join us. They're both brilliant presentations, and just for people who are asking, tonight's webinar, it was recorded, so it'll be available to view on YouTube tomorrow, and you'll be able to share it with families and friends and teachers, etc. So that's brilliant. And yeah, so I don't know if there's anything else, but yeah, just brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience as well for joining us. We had an unreal crowd here tonight, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And all the lovely comments and stuff as well. So we'll see you again soon. Thanks a mil, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.